Hello from Selected Ambient Rumors. I am Bora. Today, I want to tell you the story of the Christmas evening when Charles Bukowski and Leonardo DiCaprio met. We will continue to share this kind of videos. Therefore, I would be happy if you subscribe. If you're ready, let's begin. On Christmas Eve of the year 1975, George DiCaprio invited Charles Bukowski to his home for Christmas dinner and took him to his sleeping one-year-old baby. He carefully picked the baby up from the crib and whispered with a smile, "This is Leonardo DiCaprio." Bukowski has always been very distant with children. He thought having children was a madness that even the insane wouldn't consider. He looked at Leonardo DiCaprio and thought to himself, "Oh my God, what an ugly baby." 1975 was the year Bukowski published his novel, Factotum. He was now recognized by all Americans and considered one of the cult figures of American underground literature. He had thousands of fans. George DiCaprio was also at that time one of the leading figures in the underground comic book world as a writer and publisher. He lived in the back streets of the Hollywood Boulevard, filled with addicts and prostitutes, and knew Bukowski from the neighborhood. Even though DiCaprio had started a family, he did not want to break away from the streets. He wanted these streets to nourish his art and for social change to start from these streets. He was an activist. All of this was nonsense to Bukowski. The house was very clean and truly a family home. Christmas decorations, a brightly shining Christmas tree, a tidy living room. The family atmosphere always suffocated him. The clean state of the house invited him to be proper. But he loved places where he could throw himself around as he wished, not hesitate to make a mess, and leave whenever he wanted. Moreover, he was dead drunk at that moment. He hated trying to restrain himself when drunk. He thought, "What am I doing in this place?" He took out the half-finished bottle of whiskey from his jacket pocket. He looked around for a glass. He turned back to the dining table. On the table, there were dishes suitable for a classic American family Christmas dinner. The big turkey in the middle was served with mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and fresh vegetables. George's wife, Ermeline, was setting the plates on the table. The flatware was chosen with care. The table set with porcelain plates, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses exuded elegance. Ermeline was a very tasteful woman. Bukowski picked up the crystal wine glass from the dining table and filled the entire glass with whiskey. He finished it in one gulp, then refilled it. The DiCaprios saw this, gave a little smile, and continued with the table preparation. After all, Bukowski's behavior was not surprising to them at all. Bukowski took a cigarette pack out of his pocket, put a cigarette in his mouth, and lit a match. He blew the smoke from his mouth. The DiCaprios got even more tense. George said, "Bukowski, there is a baby in this house. Unfortunately, we don't smoke." Bukowski couldn't believe it. Did they also believe in the ridiculous health trend of recent times? Why was he here instead of at a bar, where he could comfortably drink his whiskey and smoke? He couldn't stop himself and waved the cigarette in his hand towards baby DiCaprio. "Do you think this child will breathe anything other than exhaust and cigarette smoke when he grows up, DiCaprio?" "Let him get used to it now," he said. Leo stirred slightly with the voice. George was upset that his child was not being respected. Still, he tried to stay calm, but Bukowski had been provoked. He continued with a smile. "Yes, tell me. What is George DiCaprio, a leading figure in underground art, doing in such a peaceful environment?" George replied with a smile. "Didn't you like our home? I like it, but if you want peace, why do you live in the middle of this prostitute's paradise?" Bukowski took a swig of his whiskey, took a deep drag from his cigarette, and continued. "Don't fool your wife and child into thinking the world is a clean place, DiCaprio," he said. His speech was slurring from drunkenness. Just then, he noticed the ash accumulating on his cigarette and, looking at the DiCaprios, tapped the ash onto the special Christmas dinner plates that Ermeline had put out. The DiCaprios looked at the ash on the plate and took a deep breath. Bukowski noticed that this irritated them, and he liked it very much. George was truly boiling over. Just then, baby Leo, disturbed by the noise, started to stir and began to murmur softly. Ermeline went to Leo in a panic, picked him up, and patted his back, saying, it's okay, and put him back to sleep. Then she turned to Bukowski and said, "Shh," asking him to be quiet. This obligation to be quiet drove Bukowski mad. Moreover, he was too drunk to be quiet. The more he tried to suppress himself, the more he raged in anger and finally exploded. "So, how pure you all are. Either this system, this piece, is not real, or your art is not real. Make up your mind, DiCaprio. Which one are you? Literature cannot tolerate hypocrisy," he shouted out loud. It was too late. Before Bukowski could finish his sentence, Leo started crying loudly. Ermeline took him in her arms. George couldn't control his nerves. "Enough already. Shut up, man. Since you got here, you've been trying to show that you don't want to be here, but you are here. What are you trying to prove?" he shouted. Bukowski replied to George, "You're a hypocrite. You're acting like this kid won't grow up to be a penniless alcoholic. This kid is the unluckiest child in the world. If he had a bit of luck, he would be born into a terrible family and get prepared for real life." And he finished the whiskey he had just poured in one gulp. Then he took one last drag from his cigarette, and as he exhaled the smoke, a bright idea came to his mind. Clenching his teeth, he looked at George DiCaprio and, without breaking eye contact, slowly extinguished his cigarette on the large turkey on the table. His whole body wanted George to attack him. Indeed, George was really taken aback by this move. Bukowski took advantage of George's bewilderment and kept shouting. He was now hurling insults, cursing George's art, his home, even his family. As he shouted, baby Leo cried even more. The more baby Leo cried, the angrier George became. In the end, George jumped up and grabbed Bukowski by the collar. "Shut up, damn you! Shut up!" He started shaking Bukowski. Leo was screaming. Ermeline shouted, "Please stop it now," and patted Leo's back. Bukowski also got up and grabbed George's collar. He touched his nose to his. "Come on, DiCaprio. Do you have the courage to throw the first punch? Come on." He started shaking him. They were constantly shouting and shaking each other without listening to one another. But at one point, Bukowski's attention shifted away from George's shouting to completely focus on the baby's voice. These groans, these screams, seemed to have completely taken over him. This shrill sound was about to pierce Bukowski's ears. George was shouting right in front of him, but Bukowski couldn't even hear what he was saying. He remembered a moment from his childhood when he cried like this, and his father beat him with a belt to silence him. The more his father hit him, the more he cried, and the more he cried, the more his father hit him. Hearing the sound of a baby in his ears, these were on her mind. He paused and stopped. George was still shouting, "Are you happy? You ruined all our peace? Is this what you wanted?" Shaking Bukowski. Ermeline shouted at George, "Enough, George. What kind of father are you? You need to calm the situation." George let go of Bukowski and started shouting at Ermeline. "What kind of mother are you? Mother, father, child?" Everyone in the DiCaprio family was shouting. Bukowski's whole body was tense. His eyes squinted. He was in a panic. He wanted this noise to end as soon as possible. As the DiCaprio couple argued, Bukowski quietly said to Ermeline, "Give me the baby." Ermeline did not hear. This time he shouted, "Give it to me," and suddenly snatched the baby from her hand. Ermeline and George tried to take the baby from him with a sudden reflex, but Bukowski did not give the baby back to them. Both were shouting, "What are you doing, Bukowski?" Bukowski was not listening to them. Involuntarily, he lifted the child with both hands and brought it in front of his head. Leonardo DiCaprio and Charles Bukowski met eyes. Bukowski was just looking at him, not knowing what to do. For a moment, his eyes drifted to the window next to him. He wanted to throw the baby out of it. This would solve all his current problems, but he didn't do it. The only thing he could think of now was to give him a solid slap, but this desire made him feel terrible in an unexpected way. He didn't know what to do, and without thinking, he involuntarily brought his head to the baby's belly, and he started shaking his head like a drooling bulldog. He was making sounds like a dog. The tension on Leo's face began to relax. There was a look of astonishment on his face. This time, Bukowski looked into his eyes, and this time, he imitated a dog while looking at him. Drool was coming out of his drunk mouth, and his lips were sagging to both sides. Leo laughed. His crying stopped. Bukowski did it again. This time, Leo laughed louder. His parents looked at them in astonishment. His mother made a move to gently take the baby from Bukowski. Leo immediately whimpered again. His mother retreated. Bukowski laid the baby on his chest, smelling of whiskey and cigarettes. He was very surprised. The baby's breathing calming down had also calmed Bukowski's breath. He couldn't even remember the last time he brushed his teeth, but it was very clear that Leo was pleased with this bad breath. George calmly said, "Shall we go to the table?" Bukowski was feeling hungry. This was very rare. He held Leo against his chest with his left arm. With his right hand, he placed food from the table onto his plate. Ermeline smiled at Bukowski and cut the part of the turkey where a cigarette had been put out with a knife. This embarrassed Bukowski. They started laughing. Leo was slowly falling asleep. George noticed that Bukowski's whiskey in the glass was finished and poured another whiskey into the glass he imagined filling with a quality red wine that evening. Bukowski lit another cigarette. Ermeline was seeing someone chewing food while smoking for the first time. It was very strange. They started eating and drinking. For hours, they chatted about art, literature, the meaning or meaninglessness of life. They laughed, they had fun. It was the most cheerful evening the four of them had spent in a long time. Leo slept soundly in Bukowski's lap throughout the night, nestled in the cigarette smoke. Is the future going to be beautiful, or will Leonardo DiCaprio become a broke alcoholic? Is a peaceful family possible? Bukowski did not know these, but there was only one thing he was sure of. He was very peaceful at that moment.